In the heart of the African savanna, where the sun beat down with an unforgiving intensity and the parched earth cracked under its relentless gaze, a drama of life and death was unfolding, unseen by most, yet profoundly significant. A majestic lion, a creature of raw power and untamed spirit, found itself ensnared, not by a rival, but by the cruel, unthinking bite of a poacher's wire. He lay beneath the sparse shade of a withered acacia, his tawny coat matted with dust and dried blood, his breath shallow, a king dethroned by a loop of cold metal. Ranger Elias Thorne, a man whose soul was as weathered and enduring as the ancient stones of the kopjes he patrolled, had been tracking the signs of distress for 2 days. This was a familiar, terrible kind of pursuit. Before we dive into the heart of this extraordinary encounter, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that kindness, in its myriad forms, can bridge even the wildest of divides, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the profound connections possible in this world. The initial report had been vague, a lion seen behaving erratically, then disappearing. But Elias knew the subtle language of the bush. He'd seen the drag marks in the sand, the faintest flecks of blood on a thorny branch, the anxious circling of vultures too high to commit but too interested to leave. Now, through his binoculars, the tragic tableau was clear. The snare, almost invisible against the dry grass, was cinched brutally around the lion's powerful foreleg, digging deeper with every desperate, exhausted movement. The creature's amber eyes, usually blazing with fierce independence, were now clouded with pain and a dawning, terrifying understanding of its plight. He'd shimmered above the plains, a visible manifestation of the suffering. For the lion, time was rapidly running out. For Elias, a difficult, dangerous choice was imminent. The silence of the savanna was heavy, punctuated only by the distant, mournful call of a lone hornbill, a sound that seemed to echo the lion's fading strength. But something was about to shift in that vast, indifferent silence, an interaction that would challenge everything his crew thought they knew about the wild heart of Africa. Elias Thorne was not a man prone to sentimentality, but his respect for the creatures of this domain ran deeper than the roots of the oldest baobab. He was lean, his face a map of sun and wind, his eyes the color of the stormy sky before the rains, constantly scanning, observing, understanding. For 3 decades, the Salati Reserve had been his life, its rhythms his own. He preferred the company of the silent, watchful animals to the complexities of human society. This lion, a magnificent black-maned male known to the rangers as Sekhmet's Shadow for his elusive nature and impressive lineage, was a symbol of the wildness Elias fought to protect. Now, Shadow was reduced to this agonizing state, his breaths coming in ragged gasps, the mighty chest barely rising. The leg caught in the snare was swollen, the wire buried deep within the flesh. Infection was a certainty if he wasn't freed, starvation or dehydration a close second, and the ever-present threat of hyenas, drawn by the sin of weakness, a horrifying third. Elias wasn't entirely alone. With him was Ben, a younger ranger, still learning the unforgiving lessons of the bush, and Alika, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman from a local village who served as their tracker and research assistant, her presence often a calming influence on both man and beast. They were his team, his trusted few. They watched from the relative safety of their land cruiser, parked a respectful distance away, the engine off, the only sounds their hushed whispers and the click of Alika's camera as she documented the scene for their records. The environmental threat was starkly personified by that single, glinting strand of wire, a cheap, deadly instrument of human greed or carelessness. The sun climbed higher, each degree an added torment. A faint, acrid smell began to drift on the breeze, the smell of infection starting to take hold. From a nearby termite mound, a slender mongoose rose on its hind legs, observed the scene with bright, curious eyes, and then, sensing the heavy aura of danger, vanished back into its burrow. Even the smallest creatures felt the wrongness of it. The savanna itself, usually teeming with subtle sounds, seemed to hold its breath. The grasses were tinder-dry, the waterholes shrinking, concentrating prey and predator alike, increasing the chances of such desperate measures as poaching. Elias had noted the lack of fresh kill sites in this area recently, a sign that the pride Shadow belonged to, or at least associated with, might have moved on, or that he himself had been unable to hunt effectively for some time. Perhaps the snare was an old one, forgotten, a ghost trap waiting patiently. The lion's eyes flickered towards them, a momentary spark of his former fire, quickly doused by pain. Elias knew that a direct approach was fraught with peril. A wounded lion, Even one as weakened as Shadow was a cornered catastrophe. He remembered a ranger, years ago, who had underestimated such a situation, the scars a permanent reminder etched into the man's arm and psyche. The heat was building, pressing down, a physical weight. He saw the slight tremor in the lion's massive shoulders, a sign of depleting reserves. Something had to be done, and soon. The quiet hum of distant insects seemed to grow louder in the tense anticipation, a soundtrack to the unfolding crisis. The decision, when it came, was unspoken but understood. Waiting was a death sentence for the lion. Elias slowly opened his door, the click of the latch unnaturally loud in the stillness. He retrieved the heavy-duty wire cutters and the tranquilizer rifle from the vehicle's secure case. Ben began to prepare a first-aid kit, his movements economical, his face set with concern. Alika kept her camera trained on the lion, her expression unreadable but for the tightening around her eyes. This was the catalyst, human intervention in a natural world already imbalanced by human interference. The snare, the source of the agony, was a direct consequence of actions taken miles away, or perhaps days ago, by hands that would never witness the suffering they caused. Elias began his approach, moving with a slow, deliberate calmness that belied the adrenaline coursing through him. He didn't walk directly towards Shadow, but in a wide, indirect arc, making himself appear as non-threatening as possible, his voice a low, steady murmur, more a vibration than actual words. "Easy now, big fella. Easy. We're here to help." The lion's head, heavy as it was, lifted slightly. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a sound like distant thunder, a warning born of instinct and agony. Its good paw twitched, claws unsheathing and retracting in the dust. Elias paused, holding his ground, letting the lion see him, assess him. The initial reaction was fear, manifesting as a desperate, albeit weak, surge of aggression. Shadow tried to pull against the wire, a futile gesture that only tightened its grip, drawing a fresh wave of pain that made him snarl, baring teeth that could crush bone. The first attempt to get close enough to assess the snare properly was met with this defensive fury. Elias was forced to retreat a few paces. The wire was high on the foreleg, close to the shoulder, a difficult and dangerous place to work. The lion's breathing was more labored now, each rasping inhale a struggle. He could see the flies beginning to gather around the wound, an ominous sign. Ben, watching through binoculars, muttered, "The wire's deep, Elias. It looks like it's cut right through the skin." Elias nodded, his gaze locked on the suffering animal. The sun felt like a hammer blow on his neck. He knew he had to get the tranquilizer dart in cleanly, quickly, to minimize the animal's stress and allow them to work. But a moving target, even a weakened one, was a risk. A misplaced dart could be ineffective, or worse, cause further injury or an unpredictable reaction. The first challenge was the lion's remaining fight, its refusal to surrender to the pain or the encroaching humans. Elias circled again, his boots crunching softly on the parched earth. Each step was measured. He could feel the eyes of his team on him, and the burning, pain-filled gaze of the lion. The heat was becoming a significant factor, dehydrating the already weakened animal and making the physical exertion for Elias and his team more draining. The lion let out a guttural moan, a sound that tore at Elias's composure more than any roar. It was a sound of utter desolation. He tried to speak to it again, his voice soft, rhythmic. "It's all right, Shadow. We're not going to hurt you. Just let us help." He raised the tranquilizer rifle, sighting carefully. The lion shifted, its head lolling. Then with a sudden, surprising burst of energy, it lunged, not far, barely a body length, but enough to make Elias lower the rifle and step back again. The wire bit deeper. A fresh trickle of blood welled around the steel. A vulture, bolder than the others, landed on a skeletal branch of the acacia tree, its bald head craning downwards. A grim sentinel. Ben's voice came over the small radio clip to Elias's vest. "Hyena spotted, east flank, about a click out. Moving slow, but they know." This was the escalating beat, the tightening of the noose. The scent of blood and distress was an open invitation in this harsh land. Elias knew their window of opportunity was closing. He had to act decisively. He took a deep breath, focused, and when Shadow stilled for a moment, exhausted by its previous effort, he fired. The dart flew true, embedding itself in the lion's massive flank. Shadow roared, a sound of fury and shock, and thrashed wildly for a few terrifying seconds, the snare drawing a pained cry. Then, gradually, the powerful limbs relaxed, The head sank to the dust, and the ragged breathing began to slow, to deepen. Waiting for the drug to take full effect was an agony of its own. Each minute stretched into an eternity. Elias approached cautiously, wire cutters in hand, Ben following a few steps behind with the medical kit and a canteen of water. Alika remained by the vehicle, a lookout. The lion was down, but not entirely out. Its tail twitched sporadically. Elias knelt beside the massive head, avoiding the formidable teeth, and spoke softly, almost a prayer. "Sleep now, King. Just for a little while." He could see the damage more clearly now. The wire was a thick, brutal gauge, and it had cut almost to the bone. Swelling and inflammation were severe. The smell of infection was stronger up close. This was no simple release. This would be a delicate operation. Using the heavy-duty cutters, Elias began to work on the taut wire. It was awkwardly positioned, and he had to be careful not to cause further damage to the surrounding tissue or to startle the lion into a premature awakening. The steel was tough. His first attempt to cut through it only managed to score the surface. The sun beat down, sweat stinging his eyes. Ben knelt, gently trying to clean around the wound with antiseptic, his touch surprisingly gentle for such a big man. A sudden, sharp crack echoed across the plain. Not a gunshot, but the sound of a dry branch snapping underfoot somewhere nearby. Both men froze. Alika's voice, tense, came over the radio. "Jackals. 3 of them. Coming in from the south. They're getting brave." The scavengers were closing in, drawn by the same grim promise as the hyenas. Elias gritted his teeth and applied more pressure to the cutters. The wire groaned, resisted, then, with a sharp snap, it parted. But it wasn't over. The wire was embedded, looped multiple times. He had to cut it in several places, carefully teasing the pieces out of the swollen flesh. One section was particularly deep, and as he worked to free it, the lion groaned, a deep, unconscious sound of pain, and its massive body shuddered. For a heart-stopping moment, Elias thought it was waking, but its eyes remained closed, the breathing still deep and regular, though a little faster. This was the painstaking process, the investigation into the depth of the injury, the discovery of how cruelly the snare had done its work. He managed to extract one piece of the wire, then another. Each removal seemed to allow the constricted limb a fraction more relief, but also revealed the horrifying extent of the damage. The flesh was raw, bleeding, a deep channel carved where the metal had been. Ben applied more antiseptic, his brow furrowed in concentration. The heat was relentless. Elias could feel his own strength beginning to wane, the constant tension and physical effort taking their toll. He thought of other rescues, some successful, some tragically not. Each one left its mark. He looked at the lion's face, so serene in its enforced slumber, yet still so powerful. The responsibility weighed heavily. The distant yip of a jackal sounded closer now. They were running out of time before the scent of fresh blood drew more than just opportunistic scavengers. One final piece of wire remained, stubbornly embedded near a tangle of sinew. Elias repositioned himself, trying to get better leverage. His hand slipped, the cutter jarring against the lion's leg. Shadow's great body tensed, a muscle spasming violently in its tranquilized sleep. A low, almost silent growl vibrated through its chest. Elias froze, his heart pounding. This was the moment where it could all go wrong. He held his breath, waiting. The lion settled again. He exchanged a look with Ben, whose face was pale beneath his tan. Morale dipped. The sheer, bloody reality of the wound, the oppressive heat, the circling threats, it felt overwhelming. But there was no turning back. With renewed determination, Elias carefully gripped the last piece of wire. He took a steadying breath, focused all his strength and precision, and with a final, decisive snip, the last strand came free. The lion's leg, now completely unbound, lay limp in the dust. The snare was gone. Shadow was physically free from its metallic bonds. A wave of relief washed over Elias, so profound it almost buckled his knees. He sat back on his heels, the heavy cutters falling from his numb fingers. Ben was already at work, gently cleaning the horrific wound as best he could, applying a thick layer of antibiotic salve, then carefully bandaging the leg with wide gauze. It was a temporary measure, but crucial to give the lion a fighting chance against infection. The tranquilizer would not last forever. They had perhaps another 20 minutes, 30 at most, before Shadow began to stir. Elias watched Ben's careful ministrations, his gaze then drifting to the lion's massive head. The danger hadn't passed, not by a long shot. A freed lion, disoriented and in pain, could be incredibly dangerous. And Shadow was a wild animal, a king of this domain, unaccustomed to human touch, to human proximity. Okay, Ben, that's good. Let's move back. Now, Elias said, his voice low but firm. They gathered their equipment, every movement economical, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. The jackals had retreated slightly with their closer presence but were still visible, skulking in the tall grass. The vultures still circled overhead. Elias signaled to Alika, who started the land cruiser's engine, the sudden rumble a jarring intrusion in the tense quiet. They retreated to the vehicle, positioning it a safe distance away, but close enough to observe. Now came the wait. The high-pressure countdown had begun. How would Shadow react upon waking? Would he be able to stand? Would the pain and disorientation make him aggressive, or would he be too weak to move? Elias felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He had done all he could. The rest was up to the lion, to its incredible resilience, its will to survive. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The minutes ticked by, each one laden with an almost unbearable suspense. The fate of Sekhmet's Shadow hung precariously in the balance, in the shimmering heat of the African afternoon. He had made the decision to intervene, risked his safety and that of his team. Now, the wilderness would deliver its verdict. The sun was beginning its slow descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple, when the first sign of movement came. Shadow's ear twitched. Then, a massive sigh escaped its lungs, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Its tail moved, slowly, deliberately, thumping once against the dusty earth. Elias and his team watched, silent, transfixed. Ben had his hand on the door handle, ready for a quick retreat if necessary. Alika had her camera raised, though her finger hesitated over the shutter button, as if unwilling to break the spell. Slowly, agonizingly, the great head lifted. Shadow's eyes, still clouded from the tranquilizer and the ordeal, blinked. He seemed disoriented, shaking his head slightly as if to clear a fog. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He saw his leg, now bandaged, lying before him. He sniffed at it cautiously, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. He tried to put weight on it, then recoiled with a soft grunt of pain. He lay still for another long moment, gathering himself. The air in the land cruiser was thick with unspoken tension. Every instinct Elias possessed was on high alert. He had seen tranquilized animals wake before. Sometimes they were groggy and passive, other times explosively aggressive. Then, Shadow did something unexpected. Instead of immediately trying to flee or showing outright aggression towards the distant vehicle, he slowly, painfully, pushed himself up onto his 3 good legs, his injured limb held carefully off the ground. He stood there, swaying slightly, a magnificent, wounded king surveying his domain. And then he turned his head. His gaze, clearing now, sharpening, swept past the acacia tree, past the distant termite mounds, and settled directly on the land cruiser. Directly on Elias. The intensity of that stare was palpable, even from 50 yards away. It was not the vacant look of a drugged animal, nor the blazing fury of a cornered one. It was something else entirely, something that held a profound, unnerving intelligence. The world seemed to shrink, to focus into the space between the man and the lion. Dust motes danced in the slanted golden light. The distant calls of birds faded into an immense, breathless silence. Elias met that gaze, his own unwavering. He didn't move, didn't speak. He felt a strange connection, a moment of understanding that transcended species, transcended the raw fear and the instinct for survival. It was a look that seemed to acknowledge, to see. Ben let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He's looking right at you, Elias. Alika lowered her camera slightly, her eyes wide. Time stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. The lion held his gaze, unwavering, its massive head still, its amber eyes like pools of molten gold reflecting the last light of day. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of the risk, the pain, the shared ordeal. Elias felt a prickling sensation on his skin, not of fear, but of something akin to awe. He had faced down aggressive animals many times, felt the primal terror of a charge, but this was different. This was a silent communication, ancient and profound. And then, what happened next sent a jolt through the small crew, a ripple of pure, unadulterated shock. The lion, Sekhmet's Shadow, still holding Elias's eyes, let out a sound. It wasn't a growl, not a roar of challenge. It was a soft, almost inaudible chuff, a gentle exhalation of breath, a sound so quiet it was nearly lost in the vastness of the savannah. It was a sound lions typically reserved for trusted pride members, a sound of greeting, of reassurance, of benign presence. Elias's heart leaped. He had heard that sound before, between a lioness and her cubs, between familiar males. But never like this. Never directed, it seemed, with such clear, calm intent towards a human. The sheer unlikeliness of it, the quiet intimacy of it in the face of what had just transpired, the trauma, the drugs, the human intervention, was staggering. Ben gasped audibly. Alika's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes shining. For a moment, the lion simply stood there, after the chuff, its gaze still locked with Elias's. Then, with an almost regal dignity, it slowly, deliberately, turned its massive body. It did not bolt in fear. It did not look back again. Favoring its injured leg, it began to walk, slowly but with purpose, towards a dense thicket of bush willow, its form gradually merging with the deepening shadows. The king was retreating, not in defeat, but with a quiet power that left them all speechless. The silence that descended in the land cruiser was profound, broken only by the soft click of Alika finally taking a picture of the retreating lion, a silhouette against the fiery sunset. Elias let out a long, slow breath, the tension draining out of him, replaced by a feeling he couldn't quite name, a mixture of profound relief, humility, and an overwhelming sense of wonder. Did you hear that?" Ben whispered, his voice hoarse. Elias nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The soft chuff, a sound so small yet so significant, echoed in his mind. Shadow disappeared into the undergrowth. He was free, but his journey to recovery had only just begun. Elias knew he would instruct his team to monitor the area closely over the coming days and weeks, to watch for any signs of Shadow from a safe distance, to ensure the infection didn't overwhelm him, that he could begin to hunt again. The immediate aftermath was one of quiet awe. The crew packed up their remaining gear, the usual banter absent, replaced by thoughtful silence. As the last sliver of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the savanna in a cloak of soft purple and gray, Elias turned the land cruiser towards camp. The image of the lion's steady gaze, the memory of that soft, almost impossible sound, was seared into his mind. The lion had looked back, and in that look, in that sound, there had been something that felt like an acknowledgement, a moment of interspecies connection so rare and powerful it defied easy explanation. It wasn't gratitude in a human sense, Elias knew that. It was something wilder, deeper, a momentary bridge across an ancient chasm. The lion was alive, its agency restored, choosing its path back into the wild heart of its world. The wound was severe, and survival in this unforgiving land was always a fragile proposition. But now, there was hope, a powerful, resonant hope. As they drove away, leaving the vast, encroaching silence of the African dust to settle over the plains, the legend of the lion that had stared into a ranger's soul and offered a moment of shocking, gentle grace, began to take root in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. And for the first time that day, a true, deep silence returned to that particular patch of the savanna, a silence filled not with dread, but with an unspoken reverence. Thanks for watching. If this story touched you, give it a like and subscribe for more wild moments of wonder.